It's getting colder in Ukraine as winter sets in, and more than 1 million homes are without power after Russia unleashed a barrage of missiles and drones aimed at critical energy facilities. The onslaught forced people in the capital of Kyiv to shelter in metro stations and destroyed houses near the city of Odessa in the south. At least 5 people there were injured. Russian President Vladimir Putin says this assault was because Ukraine used American-made missiles to strike inside Russian territory, something President Biden gave Kyiv the green light to do earlier this month. Today, Putin criticized Biden for creating what he said are difficulties for President-elect Donald Trump's incoming administration. And he praised Donald Trump as intelligent and experienced, someone who will find solutions. Joining us now is retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Colonel Leighton, thank you so much for sharing part of your Thanksgiving with us. I first want to get your response to this accusation from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that in these attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure right before winter, they used cluster munitions. How well is Kyiv equipped to deal with something like that?
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing, Boris, and happy Thanksgiving to you. There are certain munitions that are actually outlawed under international law, and cluster munitions generally are outlawed. There are some exceptions to that, but that is something that, if true, does create some significant problems for the Ukrainians. What they would have to do is prevent the delivery vehicle from actually hitting its target, and even then, the risk of cluster munitions impacting on civilians is pretty high. So it's a very dangerous escalation if that in fact turns out to be the case.
And Colonel, you and I were on the air last night speaking about this. The incoming Trump administration is going to seek to broker a ceasefire early into his second term. Is there much that President Biden can do right now on the way out to strengthen the Ukrainian position before entering in negotiations?
Well, a lot depends on the logistical pipeline, Boris. And when you look at the types of weapons that are coming into Ukraine, they're helpful, certainly, but they have to get there in time and they have to be used. And the Ukrainians that are using them have to be trained properly. So take, for example, the ATACMS missile system, the Army Tactical Missile System, that is what we've been talking about. That's the weapon system that is now allowed to target Russian targets on Russian soil. That particular weapon system is something that the Ukrainians have used before, and they're pretty capable at using it. But what they need is the munitions to use that. They need to put it in the right places, and they need to select the right targets. They're very capable of doing that, but they needed the equipment to make that happen. And a lot of that is in the pipeline, but it has to get there in order for it to be effective. And of course, there's also that $7 billion aspect of this basically funding that the U.S. has earmarked for Ukraine. A lot of that will not be able to be spent before January 20th. And that, of course, is a significant issue for the Ukrainians.
So as a potential ceasefire gets ironed out, what do you think it might look like from a practical standpoint? Is there the potential for a scenario where we could see another version of a demilitarized zone between Ukraine and Russia?
That is a possibility. And of course, a lot of what is being talked about now will not be exactly what happens, but a demilitarized zone or some kind of area in which the Ukrainian and Russian forces are separated, kind of like what you see in between North and South Korea, is a distinct possibility, especially in the Donbas region, where in the eastern part of Ukraine, where you have Russian forces gaining ground right now. And if they can be stopped by the Ukrainians, that would be a place where there could be such a demilitarized zone. That is something that could happen. Another possibility, of course, would be that the Ukrainians agree to transfer their territory that they've captured in the Kursk region of Russia if the Russians give back some of the territory that they have taken over in Ukraine. So there are a lot of different aspects that could happen, but if things are frozen in place, there's a very high likelihood that there would be some kind of a demilitarized with Russia gaining some territory that it has captured during this latest period since February of 2022.
Colonel, I also wanted to get your thoughts on Putin's praise of Donald Trump, again, calling him Intelligent, experienced, capable of finding solutions. How important is their personal relationship to brokering a deal?
I think it's very important. Personal chemistry always plays a role in international relations. Sometimes it's not as much a factor as in other cases, but in this particular case between President Putin of Russia and incoming President Trump, that personal relationship could be key. The one thing for the incoming administration to watch out for is that they don't give away the story. In other words, that they don't give away too much to the Russians and don't let themselves get rolled by them. That is something that the Biden administration has sought to avoid with some degree of success, but that is the kind of thing that could very well result in some kind of a ceasefire. At some point, no matter who was going to be president, there was going to be a ceasefire in this conflict. The question is to what advantage, which party is going to be best advantaged by that? Will it be the Russians or will it be the Ukrainians? And given the preponderance of forces, the Russians stand to gain a great deal diplomatically and militarily in this case.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, we have to leave the conversation there. Appreciate your time and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, Boris. Thank you.